evening and welcome. The Finance Minister of India says there are 42,800 crorepatis in India, and at least this community of the rich, or should we say the super rich, should be ready to pay a higher tax, or at least a surcharge on the tax that they're already paying. On the program today, we look at the concept of giving back. Is the way to give back by the rich to the poor, to an intrinsically unequal country like India? Is that way through taxation? Is that way through corporate social responsibility? Is that way through charity? On the program today, we ask whether the surcharge on the super rich will in fact mean just taxing the already taxed, or will it pull affluent India out of an instinctive bubble of elitism? What about all the undisclosed income? What about the fact that the government's own estimates say that 25 lakh crores of rupees are black money? And then we're not even talking about agricultural income, which remains untaxed in this country. Let me start with the Minister for Corporate Affairs, Sachin Pilot. Sachin, two things. One is, of course, your ministry's own bill that's now been passed in the Lok Sabha that does talk about how companies with over 500 crores of revenue should now be giving at least 2% of their profits back. And then there is now the finance minister invoking the principle of everybody's inner Azim Premji, at least those who have the money to invoke an inner Azim Premji, and saying, look, hang on, if you earn above 1 crore of rupees, you should be willing to be taxed a little higher. Is this a reasonable argument? Because if India's economy post-liberalization essentially says that wealth creation, as long as it's honest, is now a virtue of economics, then why are you penalizing people who have earned, let's presume, their money through honest means?
Well, there are two facts about life that don't change. One is death, other is taxes. And what we're talking about here, Barkha, I think it's important to understand the perspective of why this thing was done out. There is a huge perception correction that needs to be taking place in India today, because there is rising inequality. While I don't think that we should be taxing the super rich and the well-to-do people just so we can fund the other activities of the government. But if for 1 year, a 3% incremental payment by the people who earn more than 1 crore, not only is it, I think, in some ways symbolic, I think the government only gets about 1,500 crores or 2,000 crores from those kind of taxations. But it's something that in a difficult time when we have high fiscal deficit, we have huge social sector spending, money is going out and outlays in programs of development, etc. Just to be a significant, visible contributor, a tad bit more than everybody else. I think that's the symbolism of all of this, and it's also some substantial money for a year. The other aspect that you touched upon is about the companies paying. Now, I want to make it very clear that the corporate social responsibility that's being mandated, that money does not come to the government. So there is no cess or a charge that we as government receive. We're only saying it's the money that you've generated from this revenue, from this society.
So give it to any project.
And do it however you want it, whatever means you want to use, but that money does not come to the government first.
But the fact that you're legislating it and now looking also at this surcharge, at the heart of it is the same philosophy. It is an enforced giving back. Let's call it that. It's mandated by law, whether it's the tax or it's the corporate social responsibility bill. The question that many of the people here would say is that, listen, hang on. There are people who aren't even paying their taxes. There are people who are stashing away income, evading tax outside India and so on. Now, that community is somehow exempt from all of this, and what you're already doing is taxing the already taxed. Many of the companies that you're bringing within this ambit are already paying corporates, are already donating towards CSR. So why this enforced giving back? Doesn't that contradict the very notion of philanthropy?
It's not either or. It's not that you should let people who have made huge amounts of money, they should be gone scot-free. We must nab those people who are not disclosing their income or not the right amounts of income. But while we do that, it's also important to have some proportionality in terms of who's contributing what. Now, if you ask whether a government servant or a bureaucrat, should he or she be paying the same amount of taxes as someone who's earning more than 1 crore? The answer, to my mind, probably is not. And there are different slabs of taxation anyway. So the not so rich pay so much, the super rich pay so much. You can argue about the fact that is that too much tax? In India, the highest tax rate is 30%. In some countries, it's 40%, 50%. So it's a 3% extra that you pay for 1 year. And I think if you ask honestly, the debate can go on. But the actual people who are going to pay this money, if you ask them hearts of heart, I don't think they have any opposition to it.
You're saying the amount is so nominal that it doesn't matter for them, for their bracket. Adi Godrej, if that is the case, then speaking both as an industrialist and as the president of the Confederation of Indian Industries, is this healthy symbolism? Because the minister is making the point that, listen, this is symbolic and this is a really unequal country. So is this healthy symbolism, or is this a symbolism that is anti-entrepreneurship, as we've heard some industrialists argue?
As far as the surcharge on the tax is concerned, for 1 year, I think it's acceptable.
Only for 1 year?
It is for 1 year.
No,
currently.
but you are qualifying it by saying...
I think it should be only for 1 year.
Okay.
And let me explain.
Yeah.
I think it's acceptable because we have a huge fiscal deficit. We need to solve it, and we should look at every way to solve it, because that itself will help growth.
Okay.
So I think that's fine. Otherwise, high rates of taxes have never collected more taxes in India. We had 92% marginal rate of income tax, and our growth rates in those days used to be 3%.
Yeah.
Higher rates of taxes don't mean higher collection of taxes. And our rates of taxes, both corporate and personal taxes in the developing world, are one of the highest already. We should not compare ourselves as far as taxation goes with the developed world. Their situation is different. If they grow at 2%, they are very happy. We need to grow at 8%, 10%. We need a lot of investment. We need savings. We need entrepreneurship to be
So
encouraged.
when you say this is okay for 1 year...
So this is okay.
Why
is a symbolic thing for 1 year. But we should rely on lower rates of taxes, collecting more taxes. And I agree with you, we should broaden the tax base. We should use information technology, we should use other means to broaden the tax base, make sure all income earners fall adequately within the tax net. As far as corporate social responsibility in the Companies Bill, I support it, because, and CII supports it, because I think it's very important that corporate social responsibility is paid a lot more attention. For example, skilling and training can create a tremendous advantage in our country, where we don't have unemployment, we have unemployability.
Yeah.
We have shortage of people in certain sectors. So if we are able to spend money on the right kind of corporate social responsibility, it will be very good. And what I like about the CSR thing is it is left to the companies. It is not going to be managed by the government. We know that whenever the private sector spends X amount of money, usually it's better spent than government.
Than in government schemes.
That's across the world. So therefore, I don't believe in higher taxes, definitely in the long run. But this corporate social responsibility provision, I think, will add value to our
So you're
country.
drawing a distinction between those. And before I take that to Dinesh Trivedi, Sachin, a quick comment from you on that. That in principle, actually, you need to start lowering taxes, because in any case, it's less than 3% of India that pays taxes. There is vast amounts of income, whether it's black money or whether it's agricultural income. And for there are many poor farmers driven to suicide, but there are many flourishing farmers as well. And that's a whole different debate that we'll get into. But do you accept in principle that India needs to move towards a lower rate of taxation?
Well, my view is that we have to certainly enhance the number of people who pay taxes. It's absolutely unacceptable to have 3, 4, 5% of this 1 billion plus nation paying taxes, because then people feel cheated that I'm paying all this tax and I'm not getting facilities for it, or it's not being used appropriately. And there are lots of other people who are in the informal areas making lots of money but paying zero tax at all. So certainly tax base has to be increased, but don't forget we also pay indirect taxes, service tax, all the other things we buy from the market. So the taxes are going out, but direct taxes per se, I think we have to have a very rational view on what the slabs should be, and I think there is always scope for letting the lower income groups to have more net disposable income, because then they will consume and help the economy grow further. So rationalizing of taxes happens. It happened just a year and a half, 2 years ago. So every year tinkering with it perhaps not a good idea, but generally enhance the tax base, make it more rational, so more money comes into the pockets of people to spend it, and then have the economy generate more faster growth.
Dinesh Trivedi, this is all very commonsensical. We've seen a consensus between industry and government, but that's not actually what happens. And what a lot of people will say is that, one, reform is a risky word in politics. Who would know that better than you? You saw what happened to you when you tried to increase the hike of rail tickets and rail fares. Putting that aside, what a lot of people feel cynical about is the underbelly of undisclosed income, is the hidden income of many people. For example, and I will want the minister to comment on this, is that the government has not managed any effective austerity, is that people will say that politicians live in flourishing bungalows, which if you value them at market rates would have X amount, which people who earn just a little over a crore actually couldn't afford those houses. So people are seeing all these paradoxes and saying there's hypocrisy.
Barkha, it reminds me of Nani Palkhiwala, and incidentally the book says we the people. And what he says is India is a rich country. We all are trying our best to keep it poor. And I can tell you, this is one of the richest country the world can ever see. But where is the money going? If Mr. Chidambaram, who I respect a lot as a brilliant person, you mean to say either we are fooling ourselves or we are fooling people at large?
Why do you say that?
42,000 people only? What are we talking about? Come on now. I can bet you there are more than 1 million people, more than 1 million.
How do you reach this figure?
You know,
You mean the crorepati club is that big?
I'll tell you, I've got my figures. I've done my homework.
Okay.
If you, I normally do my homework. Sometimes I get kicked out for that. That's a different story. There is a hotel called Claridge's.
Yes.
And there is a pawn shop we sometimes frequent. You will find BMW, Mercedes, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But I won't be surprised if that panwala is also coming in that bracket.
Yeah.
But you are just closing your eyes. Why? And I'll tell you with all the sense of responsibility that we, the political system, is part of the problem.